So today we're going to talk about what that interim final rule is, its impacts or its implications for agencies' implementation of the federal DBE program, and how agencies can continue supporting disadvantaged businesses in the context of the new IFR moving forward. Now, for all of you who are joining us that are not representing a transportation agency or a business owner that doesn't necessarily do transportation work, please bear with us. This talk is not only going to be geared toward transportation agencies. A lot of these principles and a lot of these issues extend well beyond the federal DBE program, and we're going to be sure to address areas where there can be lessons learned and good ideas that other organizations can use as well in strengthening their contracting inclusion policies and the efforts they're using to support small and disadvantaged businesses. So we've organized the balance of our presentation today around the new IFR. What does it say and what are its implications for the federal DB program and by extension, other business support policies, disparity studies and information and research that organizations can use to ensure that whatever efforts they're making are tailored to the realities of their unique marketplaces. And then SB policy. So how can organizations support their programs, or excuse me, strengthen their programs by creating efforts that are targeted specifically to small businesses or SBEs, which is something that all organizations with an interest in this sort of work and these sorts of efforts can do. So let's begin with the interim final rule itself. So back in last October, unsurprisingly, USDOT issued an IFR that made fundamental changes to the federal DBE program. So for decades, the program has had a presumption that businesses owned by people of color and women are disadvantaged or socially disadvantaged. And because of that, organizations should implement the federal DBE program to help address barriers that those businesses might face as part of the USDOT funded contracts that each agency awards. What the IFR has done is essentially remove that presumption. So no longer are people of color and women automatically considered socially disadvantaged. Instead, they and other business owners who are interested in becoming certified as part of the DBE program have to submit personal narratives that demonstrate that a collection of life experiences, personal characteristics, and other factors have left them socially disadvantaged and make it harder for them to achieve success in areas including education, employment, and business. And agencies who are certifying these businesses have to make a business by business decision on whether the owners have sufficiently demonstrated their social disadvantage. And only those businesses, assuming they also meet economic requirements that are part of the federal DBE program, can be certified as DBEs. So right now, most agencies are going through the process of reevaluating their currently certified DBEs, as well as setting up processes so they can accept new applications and review personal narratives in as objective and as principled of a way as possible so that they can restart their programs and restart certifying DBEs and helping to support them. So one strong recommendation by USDOT as part of the new IFR is for agencies to use information from well-designed disparity studies to reassess their reevaluation, their recertification processes, to reset overall aspirational DBE goals. So those are just goals to encourage the participation of certified DBEs in their work, and to tailor their implementations of the federal DBE programs to any barriers that might exist in their unique marketplaces. When the IFR talks about disparity studies, though, at least in our interpretation, what they really mean is a souped up availability study. So what an availability study does is essentially estimate the percentage of dollars that an organization might award to different business groups based on their existence in the marketplace, but also the various characteristics of those businesses and how well they align with the characteristics of the projects that an organization might award. So the IFR points out three different elements of an availability study or an availability analysis that organizations and disparity studies should take into account. One, of course, is their new definition of social disadvantage. So a measure of the degree to which businesses out in the marketplace who are available and interested in an organization's work actually suffer from social disadvantage. Measures of business capacity. So what is the capacity of individual businesses to compete for and perform work for the organization? And then finally, an assessment of marketplace barriers. Are there barriers in the organization's marketplace that make it more difficult for certain businesses to compete for and participate in their work, and their program, each agency's program, and their certification and their overall goals should account for those barriers as well. So a good way to address these issues is through what we use, which is called a custom census availability analysis. And what that really means is that as part of a custom census, a research firm will collect a bunch of detailed information about the businesses out in an organization's marketplace that are potentially available for the organization's work, as well as a bunch of characteristics of the actual contracts and procurement that an agency awards, and then through a matching process, provide precise estimates of the percentage of dollars one might expect that agency to award to different business groups based on these characteristics, as well as their existence in the marketplace. So two key components that we've highlighted here, which are also highlighted in the IFR, these have been part of at least our custom census approach. To begin with, business capacity. So the way we think about that is to understand the largest contract that a business, by their own self-report, can realistically compete for or perform, so that they're considered available for contracts that align with their capacity. And then the new piece is measuring social disadvantage. And I'll talk a little bit about that piece in just a couple of minutes, but essentially identifying those businesses in the marketplace that suffer from both social and economic disadvantage, so that organizations can tailor their programs accordingly. So speaking specifically about social disadvantage, as the IFR has came out and we've had time to think about it, we've now started integrating measures of social disadvantage with throughout our availability analysis, so that we can properly account for that information. And the way we've done so is essentially through a variety of life experiences and personal characteristics, validated which one of those life experiences and characteristics are statistically related to business owners reporting that they are socially disadvantaged in one of three ways, either in employment outcomes, educational outcomes, or in business outcomes. And in that way, we can provide organizations with an idea of what the availability of socially and economically disadvantaged businesses are for their work. And then they can use that, as I said, to help set overall aspirational goals, but also to carefully design support measures for socially and economically disadvantaged businesses as part of their programs or their policies. And this is related not only to transportation organizations. Obviously, it has a direct connection to the IFR, but this idea of social disadvantage actually provides a lot of value to organizations or agencies that aren't USDOT fund recipients. If you're interested in contracting inclusion, there, of course, is a world and a possibility that that some of your tools that you've been historically using to encourage participation of, let's say, POC and woman-owned businesses in your work might become harder to use. So if your state, for example, is making efforts to outlaw the use of race or gender-based measures, if some of this case law that's making its way through the courts takes a turn and goes sideways, and measures nationally become harder to use that are related to race or gender, understanding which businesses are socially and economically disadvantaged in your marketplace, which businesses need the most support in your marketplaces is going to be critical for you to set up effective policies so that you can tailor the efforts you're using to the needs of the businesses that are interested in your work. So, as I said, once organizations have collected all this information, they have gone through their recertification processes, they have restarted their programs, they have good information and good data to design the individual efforts they're using. They can then redesign, revamp, and restart their implementations of the federal DB program and continue supporting those businesses in their marketplace that need support in different areas of the business ecosystem. But as I said, it goes beyond just the federal DBE program. So, an important aspect of all of this, because there may be some tools that you can no longer use, especially if you're a transportation agency and if you're in a region where these sorts of race and gender-based programs are under attack, it behooves any organization that's interested in contracting inclusion to think about all the other measures that are part of their contracting inclusion policies that are related to small businesses in particular. Because when you're helping small businesses, you're also helping some of these historically disadvantaged businesses and helping to level the playing field and ensure that they have equitable opportunities to compete for and perform work on the projects that you award. So typically, a small business policy is made up of some collection of efforts that are designed to measure or to help economically disadvantaged businesses, regardless of the race or gender of their business owners or any other ownership characteristics. So things like condition of award participation goals, where prime contractors are encouraged to team with small businesses as part of their bids and proposals, setting aside certain contracts for exclusive bidding among certified small businesses, offering financing support, training programs, bonding support, initiatives to encourage participation of local businesses, all of this in support of helping businesses compete on a more level playing field that might not be in the same position as larger, more established businesses to compete and compete for and perform work on your projects. One fundamental aspect and question that each organization should ask itself is, well, how do I define a small business? And this varies from organization to organization, but most organizations, or at least many of them, rely on existing standards that different agencies nationwide have established. One common standard are small business definitions put forth or set forth by the US Small Business Administration. Frankly, in our assessment of this work and in our experience doing a lot of this research, we find the SBA standards to be very broad, almost to the point of including all businesses or almost all businesses as part of their definitions, making the efforts that you use based on those definitions to be at least limited in their utility to the businesses that you're actually trying to help. So one key question we had was, what are the revenues of businesses or the sizes of businesses that are actually available for or interested in government work? And how well do they actually align with what the SBA actually puts forth as part of its definition for small businesses? So in all the disparity study work that we've done, we decided to look at some of the most recent studies and combine all the raw data and just look at the distribution of firms based on their annual revenues. And here's essentially what we found, that the vast majority of businesses that are available and interested in government work are probably much smaller than one might think. So 80% of the businesses that report being available and interested in government work actually make $3 million or less in annual revenue. You compare that to the SBA standards, and the difference is pretty stark. So SBA standards, if you just use them based on each business's primary lines of work, as well as what the SBA has updated over time, you account for nearly 98%, at least according to our research, of businesses that are available and interested in government work. And the reason is because depending on lines of work, the SBA's size standards go up to $47 million a year. A business can make that much money depending on their line of work and still be defined as a small business and certified as a small business by the SBA. Now, in the federal DBE program, it's a bit lower because of the lines of work involved in transportation work. That goes up to 38 million, but still much higher than the $3 million a year that define 80% of the businesses that we've analyzed as part of our disparity study and availability work. So one question you might be asking yourself now is, so what? Why is this information helpful to me? Shouldn't I be helping more businesses than less businesses? And maybe that's true. However, at least at a gut feel, my intuition suggests that when I'm thinking about a small business program, I'm really not thinking about a business that makes $45 million a year. That to me is an enormous business. What I'd be most interested in and what our work is kind of geared toward is those businesses in that $3 million range, those businesses that actually face barriers and need support to help compete for those businesses that make $45 million a year. So we think that there are good ways to use this information to tailor contracting inclusion programs. So one way to do that is perhaps take information like this and rather than treating all small businesses and putting them into a single bucket and assuming that they have the same barriers and need the same types of help, is to create a certification program that has different groupings or different tiers of small businesses. So this is just an example. It's not based on any one organization, but what if you took data on the businesses in your marketplace and their revenues and set up your certification program accordingly? So in this example, you have SB1s, which are your smallest small businesses, SB2s, which are kind of your middle-sized small businesses, and SB3s, which are your largest small businesses. And for the sake of this example, we just cut it off at $20 million. So we don't go all the way up to SBA standards. And now you're in a position to tailor a program where you can pick and choose certain measures that make more or less sense for particular tiers of small businesses, because it acknowledges the fact that a business that, in this case, making $19 million just might need a different level of and qualitatively different types of support than a business that makes, let's say, $2 million a year. And this is just the first step. Once you have this in place, you can use all that other information from an availability analysis to flesh out and develop even a more holistic program and one that's even more tailored to the realities of your marketplace. So let's say that once you have this information, you have a lot of questions around, well, what if I want to set aside contracts or provide or start applying condition of award contracting goals? What contracts do I even choose? What size of contracts might be most appropriate for these different tiers of small businesses? So that's where the importance of capacity measures come into play. So again, the IFR is very specific about and emphasizes multiple times that organizations, as part of their availability analyses, as part of their disparity studies, should be taking capacity into account. And the way we think about that, as I mentioned earlier, is what's the largest contracts that businesses can actually perform? And once you have that information, when you're estimating availability, you don't consider all businesses available for all contracts. You only consider businesses available for those contracts that match their capacity or contracts that are worth less than their maximum capacity. So once you have that information, again, this goes beyond the federal DBE program. You can use it now to make sure that the measures that you're using for particular tiers of small businesses actually make sense for those businesses. So using the same data set, once we tiered our small businesses into SB1s, SB2s, SB3s, we just looked at the data and looked at what businesses reported to us as part of surveys in terms of their typical capacity. What's the typical largest contract that your business can perform? And as it turns out, there are pretty substantial differences when you go from one group of small businesses to the next. So SB1s, they cap out around contracts that are worth about $375,000, SB2s at about $1.5 million, and SB3s at about $4 million. And again, this is coming from the business owners themselves. We're not imposing this on them. We simply ask the question, realistically, what's the largest contract that you think your business can perform? And what this provides is critical information for organizations, because now if they're thinking about setting aside certain contracts for SB3s, they have an anchor an anchor value of what makes most sense for that group, and that's quite different for SB1s. And again, you're acknowledging the fact here that SB1s and SB3s are just fundamentally different. So you can set aside contracts for SB3s that might just not make much sense for SB1s and adjust your program and tailor your program accordingly. Now, those are just two examples, right? We just focused on business size according to revenues and business capacity. As an organization is thinking about how to strengthen its small business program and better support small and disadvantaged businesses specific to its marketplace, there's a whole host of pieces of information that you can take out of a well-designed availability analysis that allows you to make your program even stronger and make sure that it's even more targeted to the needs of your business community specifically. So things like their work specialties. So what lines of work do small businesses actually exist in, and making sure that you target your program accordingly, their interest in prime contract work versus subcontract work, and whether that differs by different tiers of small businesses, their locations within your marketplace. There might be areas of your marketplace that are historically depressed economically, and especially if you're not a transportation agency, you might want to include that as part of your program and have incentives that encourage the participation of businesses located in particular parts of your region, business age, and a whole host of other characteristics as well. And the importance of this for both transportation organizations and organizations that don't deal with the federal DB program is that you want this information for your agency, for your contracts and procurements, because your marketplace is just going to be different from national statistics, from what other agencies are doing, and understanding what those differences are just makes your program more effective and puts you in better position to help support the businesses that are interested and available for your work specifically. I also want to take a second just to talk about these ownership characteristics that we have here. Now, again, I've already talked about social disadvantage. You might notice that we've also included race and gender, and obviously we know how controversial even those words have become. USDOT has made it clear that they do not want you to track information and report information back to them about outcomes for businesses owned by people of color and women. That doesn't mean that doing so is somehow illegal or that you can't do it. You can still track this information and collect this information as part of availability analyses. We don't know what the future holds. Having that information can be useful for you in implementing the federal DB program in the future, but also meeting internal objectives and perhaps contracting inclusion objectives that you have for your locally funded contracts or your state funded contracts. There is nothing preventing you, at least from a legal perspective, from collecting and analyzing that information, because at the end of the day, it's just that. It's information and research that you can have on hand. And if you're already commissioning an availability study, from our perspective, you might as well collect that information as well. And if it becomes of value to you, you at least have it in your back pocket and can use that to meet different objectives moving forward. And just to report out to your community and make sure that they know that you're monitoring this information as well, in case that's of interest to the region. Okay, Ingrid, I'm gonna throw it to you so you can tell them a little bit about the interesting topics that you'll be covering at our next webinar.
Great, thank you. Well, again, Ingrid Merriwether with Merriwether and Williams, a hub company, and we are partnering with BBC to present these webinars, as Samir said, in hopes to engage in discussion, provide what could be helpful information, provide you evidence of elements that we've seen work. Both of us have quite a few years at this, and in our case, on June 11th, we're going to talk about contracting practices. And this will not be a deep technical conversation, but we have the opportunity to draw from our experience in designing, implementing, and administering essentially a contractor supportive service program that's technical assistance, bonding, and contract financing, where we can reverse engineer successful outcomes to discern what were all the elements that led to that outcome. And so that starts oftentimes with what type of contracting structure was conducive for a small business to participate in, both in terms as a subcontractor, but we'll put a lot more emphasis on these firms being able to compete as what we call small prime contractors. So that's specific efforts and strategies that some of our sponsoring agencies have deployed in order to create an ecosystem that's conducive for these small businesses to bid directly with the agency. Direct contracting is really where we're going to put emphasis. There's so much outside of an agency owner's control when it comes to subcontracting. And those are, outcomes that, if you have a really great prime that believes in this, you can have a good experience on a project, and you have some primes who are, less sensitized to including small businesses, and you don't have the best of outcomes. So we're really staunch advocates of creating avenues for direct contracting engagement with businesses. So we'll touch upon some examples of those. We expect to have a couple of agency representatives speak directly on kind of the hows and the whats that they've implemented. One example, the City of Los Angeles Department of Public Works has something called community level contracting. Very intentional, structured contract opportunities in areas where they have the highest availability. So we're going back to Samir's point about how data helps you with this, but where they have the highest availability. In this particular case, it was sidewalk repair. That was happening throughout the county of Los Angeles. It lent itself to those projects being broken down into smaller project sizes. And they did not even have to do this as a set aside, because the dollar value of the contracts were at a level that essentially larger firms, did not pursue. And it created a sheltered environment for these businesses to be awarded work, to have continuous work, so a pipeline of opportunity. And then they received supportive services like bonding and contract financing that help them utilize these opportunities to really increase their capacity in an accelerated time period. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about true set-asides and really how these core components lead to outcomes of awarding work to these targeted businesses. But we're also going to demonstrate to you the concurrent capacity and growth of the businesses that happen as a result of those types of efforts, because I think everyone shares in the understanding and the goal of increasing the capacity of these businesses now, even more so than ever, in order to get their growth accelerated and put them in a position where the reliance on DBE programs, is not the be all and get all, because clearly that does not serve these businesses well. So looking forward to reconvening on June 11th. Hope to have another engaging conversation. And I will make one more announcement. This would be a group I think would be interested in this on June 6th. Do I have the date right? Is it June 4th? I think it's June 4th.
June 4th, I believe.
Thank you. On June 4th, EIP, and some of you are familiar, EIP is the Equity and Infrastructure Project, an organization that was founded by a few individuals that are very active in this space. That is all about how we're going to continue to include historically underutilized businesses. They have produced something called the Playbook for Prosperity. And we will be convening an event June 4th in San Francisco, where essentially they're trying to take this playbook and help agencies actualize it, because it's a lot of best practices. And this event will also be segmented in a similar way, policies, practices, and programs. So we will send out the save the date to everyone that received an invitation to this event. San Francisco is not a bad place to go in June. So if your travel budget allows for it, we would hope to see you there. And in the interim, immediately following that event, we'll be convening our practices webinar on June 11th. So thank you, and I'll hand it back over to you, Samir.
Thanks so much, Ingrid. And yeah, just want to encourage you all to please attend on June 11th. Ingrid is a much better speaker than I am, so I think she'll lead a wonderful discussion, and we can continue together working through these different issues around contracting inclusion and supporting small and disadvantaged businesses in the marketplace, because I think that's what all of us have dedicated, or many of us have dedicated our careers to. So taking together all the expertise that we bring as practitioners, as researchers, as stakeholders, as policy folks, I think that that's going to lead to some really good solutions. So we want to thank you again for your participation here today. And hopefully this provided some value to you all. And if it did, that's our primary objective and our primary goal. And there's more to come. So thank you, and we hope to see you again soon.